For every one human being on the planet, there are 200 million insects. Some look scary, some are beautiful, but today we're taking a look at the top 15 most unusual insects in the world. Number 15. Glass-wing butterfly. Taking an up-close and personal look at this amazing insect may have you thinking that it's got some serious holes in its wings, but surprisingly, the glass-wing butterfly earns its name from its transparent wings. The wings are as clear as a freshly cleaned window, and while the small white stripes on their wingtips let predators know that the glass-winged butterfly is toxic to eat, their sheer wings keep them mostly out of sight. You probably won't see them coming. These butterflies lack pigment, so their wings won't develop color while they're growing in the chrysalis. And because their wings are so thin, their texture is so rough, we can see right through them. The glass-winged butterfly looks more like an A+ art project than it does an insect, and it takes the phrase walking on air to a whole new level. Sitting on those leaves all day, waiting for the right time to form a chrysalis, often leaves them exposed to be plucked up in someone's beak. So to increase their odds of survival, caterpillars have adapted things like thorns or poisonous spines. But what about the critters who can't deliver a lethal dose? What are they supposed to do? Well, there's a whole new slew of caterpillar species in the wild that have adapted to hide in plain sight by mimicking snakes. You've got things like the red Helen swallowtail caterpillar, the spicebush swallowtail caterpillar, and the eastern tiger swallowtail caterpillar. And while these little guys may be just good enough to fool a bird, the elephant hawk moth caterpillar is good enough to even fool a human. The ends of these caterpillars look just like a snake's head, eyes and all, and when they feel threatened they can either stick their end into the air or let it hang off the end of a branch to let nearby predators know that this is not an animal they want to mess with. Looks are always deceiving, so this caterpillar is totally harmless. Unable to produce venom or bite in color, but they typically are blue-green. And while these big guys have horns or spikes all the way down the length of their bodies, it's the orange and black horns at their heads that really capture people's attention. And even though these caterpillars look scary, they're absolutely harmless. These caterpillars tend to keep to themselves, but as they get ready to pupate, it's not uncommon to find them in groups large enough to deforest a small area. They're getting ready to change, so they're pretty hungry. But if you thought these hickory horned devils looked amazing, just wait until they emerge from the pupa as royal walnut moths. Royal walnut moths are ridiculously huge, growing to be about 6 inches long, making them the largest moths by mass in Mexico. What sets this species apart is that instead of forming a chrysalis, turning into goop and then reforming as the royal walnut moth, this hickory-horned little devil burrows its way into the ground to pupate within a small chamber. So if you're ever walking through the forest or the woods watching the skies to make sure nothing winged lands on you, make sure to look down or appear larger to predators. What makes these spiders really cool is that they most likely date back to the Jurassic period, so you're looking at a potentially 200-million-year-old species. And luckily for all the arachnophobes out there, the longhorned orb weaver spider doesn't grow more than 8 millimeters, not counting those long spines. So if you do see one out in the garden, don't squash it. Instead, try to appreciate its one-of-a-kind beauty. But the best part about the longhorned orb weaver spider, aside from their Texas longhorns, if you squint hard and long enough, they kinda look like strawberries. Number 11. Roseate skimmer. Buzzing into the next spot on our list is the roseate skimmer. This species of dragonfly earns its name because of the rose-pink and sometimes red or maroon-colored abdomen of the males. The females, on the other hand, sport an orange-brown abdomen with clear orange veins in their wings and a brown thorax with a stripe down their back. And when it comes to on an island vacation with the family, this gorgeous dragonfly is going to be spotted foraging on the tops of tall vegetation and is an incredibly aggressive predator for all sorts of insects, even larger ones than itself. Purple isn't a color that you typically see in nature, so if you do manage to catch a glimpse of these roseate skimmers, consider yourself incredibly lucky. Number 9. Goromidas heros. This fly species just barely beat the timber fly for the largest in the world, and it is pure nightmare fuel. Goromidas heros are huge. They typically grow up to 8 centimeters long and have a wingspan of 10 centimeters. They can fit in the palm of your hand like it's nothing. That is, if you're willing to get that close. And while all the males feed on plants and flowers and the females don't really eat at all, it's not the type of fly you want to run into. A more territorial fly, the female heros lay their eggs near ant hills, and the larvae will eat the unborn inside. The males will make their homes Flying around the nettles and brambles of gardens and hedgerows is the scorpion fly, but don't be alarmed because the name is just that, a name. Thankfully, this is anything but a scorpion with wings, although it's definitely strange looking. It does have its scorpion-like tail, which the males use in their courtship displays. They usually mate at night, which can be a pretty dangerous game for the males. He'll present his mate with a nuptial gift of a dead insect or a mass of his own saliva to let her know he likes her. It's a lot cheaper than an engagement ring, I guess, but the female will usually kill the male during mating. But when all is said and done, the female lays her eggs in the soil and the emerging larvae will then pupate at the surface. Besides its ominous-looking tail, the scorpion fly has a black and yellow body, a reddish head with a long beak, and dark patches on the wing. If you don't know any better, it can look like a strange butterfly when you get up close, but they've got a long beak-like projection from the head that they use to feed with, typically on other dead insects. Cylindrical body that appears to have tufts of long, waxy white, yellow, and orange hairs bursting through its skin. It's the type of insect that when you see it, you're not sure if you want to run away or if you want to pet it. Either way, though, the brush jewel beetle won't care because these little guys are pretty docile as far as the insect kingdom goes. Their tiny larvae tunnel through the stems and roots of different shrubs, feeding on the plant nutrients to make sure they grow big and strong, even if they're going to be about the size of our thumb. And when they finally reach adulthood, the brush jewel beetle prefers to enjoy the heat of the day, feeding on water-rich foliage flowers and getting plenty of water before retiring for the night. On the flip side, though, the brush jewel beetle doesn't live very long, because as we all know, the light that burns twice as bright burns half as long, and such beauty is typically short-lived. Number 6. Hummingbird moth. Hummingbirds are awesome, and even moths are amazing in their own right. So what would happen if you were to kind of combine the two? Well, then you'd get the weird. So if you find yourself in any of those regions, you can find them almost around the clock. Just listen for their tiny little hum as they hover over flowers just like their bird brethren. The hummingbird moth is a great reminder that just because it's an insect doesn't mean it has to be some sort of scary, creepy crawly. And maybe the best part about these moths is the fact that just because they're hanging out around gorgeous flowers all day, just like bees, they'll pollinate the area to help the local flora populations not just grow, but thrive. I guess a great question here would be what was going on during the evolution to make a moth that imitates a hummingbird? Well, I'll leave that one to your imaginations. Number 5. Hercules beetle. The next strange-looking insect on our list is going from zero to hero just like that. Because I am, of course, talking about the insane Hercules beetle. Not only is this thing one of the largest insects in the world, but they're also one of the strongest for its size. These big guys are pretty tough to miss because of their defining physical characteristics. Have developed these horns to go head-to-head with one another in the hopes of attracting a mate and proving their worth as the strongest guy in town. And speaking of strength, how much is the strongest insect in the world able to lift? Try 850 times their own body weight. That number is absolutely ridiculous and makes them pound for pound not just the strongest insect, but one of the strongest anything. Good luck winning a fight with the Hercules beetle. Number 4. Spiny flower mantis. Some of the most unusual looking insects also happen to be some of the coolest, and the spiny flower mantis is no exception to that rule. This mantis lives in the South African region and has one of the best defense mechanisms nature can offer. It's not claws, sharp teeth, or deadly poison, because for any of those options to work, you have to get up close and personal. And while they may prove to be effective, sometimes the best way to win a fight is by avoiding it entirely. So the spiny flower, 1.5 inches long, the females are able to produce an egg sac that's about 3 times their own size. Talk about being a supermom. And of course, in true mantis fashion, those tiny yet beautiful insects are pretty mean to each other because they eat any other mantis that gets too close. And when it comes to mating season, the males who are able to find a mate, while it's great that they're helping the species live long and prosper, things tend to end a little poorly for them when the deed is done because the females take a bite out of their head and don't stop until she's full. Sorry. Number 3. Tailed emperor butterfly caterpillar. When any animal has the word emperor in its name, you know it's going to be epic. And just because you're a caterpillar doesn't mean you can't be epic. The tailed emperor butterfly caterpillar is one of the few of its kind that looks better than a caterpillar. These bugs hang out on the east coast of Australia, with the best time to see them being between the months of March and April, as all they do is propagate on the others aren't fighting over mates, food, or territory. It's usually just a reminder that not everything in nature has a purpose, but almost everything in nature can still be appreciated. Number 2. The flannel moth. You know things are about to get fuzzy when you have something like the flannel moth. These fuzzy wuzzies go by all sorts of interesting names, like the Italian asp, the fire caterpillar, and even the pus moth. There are some strange, albeit nefarious nicknames, so what exactly is going on here? Well, a lot. They start out their lives as larvae, and they're only about an inch long when they're covered in thick setae that resembles cat hair. It's an incredibly distinct look that makes them hard to miss as they're crawling about on a tree, especially in their early stages of life. But the cuteness starts and ends right there, because the last thing you want to do is get close to them, because the flannel moth larvae are very, very poisonous. They secrete a serious venom that causes an extremely painful reaction itches, but when the flannel moth finally does grow to become an adult, they're totally harmless. Number 1. Stalk-eyed fly. If flies were sharks, this species would be the hammerhead. The stalk-eye fly is an interesting-looking little fella, and it's typically found in Southeast Asia and Southern Africa. There are more than 100 different species of these little guys, with the majority of their diversity living in old-world tropics. But not these funky-looking flies, because believe it or not, the stalk-eye fly is a vegetarian, eating the decayed flora around streams and rivers and keeping the place clean. But things can get a little hairy when the stalk-eye fly gets a little too close to a farmer's crops. These flies particularly enjoy rice and sorghum and can prove themselves to be real pests when it comes time for the harvest season in the more tropical African countries. The males of this species are territorial and typically the gender with the longer stalks. The eye stalks are used in head-to-head